Hello, this is Janet Nation from Keller Williams, and today I am going to be talking about the impact of student loans on Black Americans. And to help me with that discussion, I have my longtime friend, veteran, Quentin Hardy from Movement Mortgage, and also the author of a new book, A Guide to Becoming a Homeowner for African Americans. Yes, it's different for us. And I'm going to give you the name of that book at the bottom of in the comment field. And if you want to purchase, please feel happy to do so. Feel free to do so. So, Quentin, and by the way, folks, this is my first interview, so please work with me on this one. Quentin, we're going to talk about these student loans, and you and I both know that they have, in recent years, have become problematic. In the very beginning, we didn't have to worry, or buyers didn't have to worry about that debt. It could be put on deferment, and it wasn't calculated as part of their, what we call debt to income ratio, as part of their overall debt qualifying for a mortgage. But for the last 10 years, I think it is, that has changed. So what happens now when a person has a student loan and they want to purchase a home?
Well, the student loan debt does figure into the calculation. And you're right, I probably haven't seen anyone get a deferment. It used to be years ago that if you could show the loan was going to be deferred for 3 years from the closing, you could go ahead and not count it as part of the debt to income ratio. I haven't seen anyone be able to show that or get that in over a decade, so that's a non-issue. Basically, everyone with student debt, those student debt loans, those loans are being figured into the debt to income ratio and impacting the qualifications. Part of the trickier challenge with this is if it's not the same with conventional loans or VA loans or FHA loans. For example, with an FHA loan, we have to very frequently go with not the payment, but 1% of the balance of the loan. So even though the payment might be adjusted based on income and they might be paying $200 or $300 a month, if the balance is $100,000, we have to count that as if it were $1,000 a month payment. And very frequently that can make a person no longer qualify or not qualify for what they wanted. Conventional loans are a little bit better as far as not having as a severe of an impact. But as you and I both know, a lot of African-American first-time home buyers are going to be in the category that they'll more likely need or use the FHA program.
Right. So that's pretty rough now that, you go from those loans not being counted, that debt not being counted, and now to be counted. And we know today, especially in Long Island, the average person is paying at least $3,000 a month for their mortgage. So that's definitely something that's going to be a hindrance, really, in terms of them qualifying. So, now that it's been a while now, several years that this new rule has gone into place. On a day-to-day basis, what are you seeing when people sit in front of you and they have that debt? What are you personally seeing? Are they being disqualified? What are you really seeing?
Usually they're surprised that the student loan has as much of an impact as it does. They usually are not aware until we start to do the math, especially if they've got it deferred or if they've got an income adjustment on their payment. The fact that we have to use the 1% balance is disheartening. I know, I'll tell you a quick story. I had a lady not too long ago, a Brooklyn DA. Obviously, we're not going to get into her specifics or her name, but we did all the math, and she had about $240,000, $250,000 in student loans. So we had to use $2,400 as the payment. So when we did the math, she's like, well, how am I supposed to afford a house? How am I supposed to get a mortgage? And I said, well, the challenge is that you have a mortgage. You just don't have a house to go with it. You have a $250,000 loan.
Yeah.
There isn't really anything necessarily wrong with borrowing $250,000 to go to school. Obviously, she went and got her Juris Doctorate, so she went to law school. But the challenge is borrowing $250,000 and getting a $60,000 or $70,000 a year job. That might be a good salary, but if you're making $70,000 or $66,000 and you had to borrow $250,000 to get that job, that's where the disconnect and the problem is.
Right. I think what it is, at that time when you're a student and you have access to these loans, I just don't think these students are really doing any kind of like mathematical equation here. There's like, okay, I can get this loan, I can get this money. It appears to be free money, but what they're not realizing is that it maps up very, very quickly. And when you want to do something major, like purchase a home, it's detrimental. I mean, how many of them are got, like you said, like I saw one lady, she had I kid you not, $100,000 in debt with student loan with a $40,000 income.
Yeah.
It's disastrous, really. So they're not taking the math into consideration what they're likely to earn, and this debt that they're taking out, and how quickly they'll be able to pay off this debt.
We need to look at it at the ROI. Look at the return on investment. Would I spend this amount of money to get this in return? Right,
exactly. So overall, in the Black community, this is just really a major problem. It's a major problem in the respect that we are borrowing at a higher rate and defaulting it at a higher rate. Can you talk more about that? Can you be more specific?
As a matter of fact, if you like, I even have a chart I can show you. You want me to pop that on the screen real quick?
Yeah, sure.
All right, this chart actually shows when the problem started to become more dramatic. If you look back in the late 80s and throughout the 90s, you can see that African Americans, whites, Hispanics, there was a slight difference in our rate of borrowing, but not that dramatic. And around the turn of the century, around 2000, well, everybody started to borrow a little bit more. Whites borrowed more, but African Americans, we borrowed a lot more as compared to our cohorts. And you can see that's really the problem. So nowadays, and that goes to 2013, the statistics are that about 87% of African Americans going to a four-year college are going to take out student loans, and it's about 60% of whites.
Right.
But we also borrow more money than our non-Black counterparts, and we pay it back slower. We have higher default rates. As a matter of fact, if you look at the 2003 statistics, after 12 years, about 50% of African Americans had defaulted on their student loans, while it was about 21.5% for whites and 36% for Latinos.
Yeah. Why do you think we're borrowing more? Why do you think? I mean, I got an idea why we're defaulting for real, but why do you think we're borrowing more?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. Very frequently, since you probably know the statistics that African Americans as a group have a significantly lower net worth than our non-Black counterparts, when we go to college, we don't have necessarily the same resources as other groups to take to college in the first place.
Right. That's true. We don't have that multi-generational wealth that you and I have talked about in the past. And so we don't have the money, so we borrow. And so why are we defaulting at a higher rate?
Yeah, this video could be 2 hours long, or could be. But as far as just some quick reasons why we're defaulting at a higher rate is, well, like we said, we borrowed more to begin with, so we have a higher payment to begin with. But the greater disparity is not only did we borrow more and have a higher payment, African American students upon graduation are more likely to not find a job as quickly as our white counterparts. We are more likely to be paid less than our white counterparts in the same geography with the exact same degree.
Right.
So when you add all those things up, and I'm not pointing the finger at anybody. As a matter of fact, you mentioned my book, and in the parentheses, it's yes, it is different. That's what we really always look at. It's not about blaming somebody or pointing a finger or the government should do something. We as Black people, we as African Americans have to understand that things are different for different groups. For example, I know I used to work in the pharmaceutical industry, and there's a major cardiovascular study done in Framingham, Massachusetts. And a lot of the early pharmaceuticals were based on this study, but it was done with almost 100% Caucasians in the Northeast. So they started to say, well, if you look at Asian Indians or American Indians or Blacks, it's all different. And we're also culturally different. I mean, why is it that there's always jokes about Black people playing basketball instead of hockey? Well, if 80% of African Americans live in or near an urban center and 80% of whites do not, well, then automatically your environment is different. And
Right.
I grew up in Queens. Nobody played hockey in Queens, but there was a basketball court on every corner.
Right.
So we played basketball because that's what was available. When I moved to Westchester, there was a pond near my high school and near where I lived where people would skate. So I learned to ice skate, and there you could play hockey. So it's not about, the race as much as it is about the culture. Things are different. And again, we're not blaming or pointing. We just have to look at student loans differently and mortgages and almost everything in this country. We have to look at it from our own special personal perspective and make decisions accordingly, rather than looking at another group and making decisions as they do. They have to make decisions based on their culture and their community and their network.
And you know what, Quentin, I don't know if it's necessarily always culture, yes, is part of it, but also opportunity, what we've had an opportunity to be exposed to.
Sure.
So that's, games like basketball is free. All you need is a hoop and a space, and you shoot the ball and you're having a good time. Hockey, you need all this expensive equipment.
Yeah,
Some of this stuff is really kind of like outside of our control based on the history of what we have gone through as, Blacks in America.
Right, and we just need to be aware of it and look at things appropriately.
Right. So what do you think, so we know we've just heard that, Black people are borrowing more and defaulting at a higher rate, and our incomes, primarily because our income is less. We don't have access to wealth from our families to help us out with those payments. What do you think, especially for those people that are going to school this September for the first time and thinking about taking out student loans? What do you suggest that they can not be caught up in this trap? Because at one point, hopefully, they're gonna want to buy a home. It's the number one way to build wealth in America. And if you can't buy that home, it's actually just really detrimental. So what is it that they can do, or some of the things that they can do to avoid getting into this rut with the student loans? Those that haven't started yet.
Don't look at your neighbors and see what they're doing, especially if they're not part of your same group. And what I mean by that is figure out what fits for you, and don't be pressured. Very frequently we see people that, they have to go to this school or that school for a name. The name thing of the school is not nearly as important as just getting the degree. And even more important than the degree might be actually getting an education.
Right.
So, I'll use myself as an example. Is my older son's already graduated. When he and my younger son both applied, they got accepted to all the schools they applied to. They both ended up going to Binghamton University, which is a state school. And just to give an example, they were also accepted to NYU. But at the time, NYU was $75,000 a year plus room and board. There was no way I was going to spend $300,000 for an undergrad, especially when neither one of them was 100% certain what their major would be. So it was most likely going to change.
Right.
And I didn't have the $300,000. So they would have needed to get $300,000 in student loans or $150 in student loans or whatever. So I said, no, we're gonna. And fortunately, my older son, he was accepted to Binghamton and NYU among other schools. He saved me a conversation by choosing Binghamton University on his own. I don't know if he was considering the math of the numbers, but if he had chosen NYU, the conversation would have been, here's why we think you're going to Binghamton University. And we had saved up and had the funds for him to go to Binghamton. So he graduated with no student debt. Now, if he didn't have the money for Binghamton, then maybe he would have gone to Suffolk Community College or Nassau Community College if that's how much money we had.
Yeah.
We didn't feel obligated, to send him to a super expensive school. And I know at one point one of my colleagues at work was actually berating me behind my back. She said, "Oh, well, he's going to a state school. My daughter's going XYZ." I said, you know what, I don't really care. I don't care I don't have that peer pressure, kind of, you got to send them to that school or this school. He got a great education at a quality school, and he graduated with no debt.
Yeah.
If I had $1 million put aside for his education, might I have done something different? I don't even know, because it's still return on investment, the value. I don't see the value. And again, not to berate NYU, a great school, but let's face it, NYU is the #1 most applied to school in the United States, not because it's the best school, but because it's in New York City, and people all across the country want to come to New York City.
Yeah.
So we also have to look at the schools and the price and realize it's not just the education, there's other factors. Miami's a beautiful city. That's a great place to go to college. Is it a good school? I don't know, but Miami's a beautiful city. And we have to remember that who's very frequently picking these colleges and then taking out student loans? They're children. Yeah. They're not even 18 years old in some cases.
Yeah. I mean, really, this is New York. This is New York City. Every school type of subject is available. So, to send your children outside of New York, and especially when you don't have it, just because, it looks good or sounds good. But wait a minute, let's think about 4 years later, if they complete the 4 years and that debt that is accumulated, was it really worth it? I do hear people talk about, well, the experience, we'll have some other kind of experience in life, because it's not going to be no fun paying back $100,000 debt. It's just not going to be any fun. You can still have a great college experience locally. So I think, when you think of a place like New York, there's just so many better options. Unless you're getting like 100% scholarship, then okay, sure. But if you're not, you really got to think about it, what you're going to do, what you're going to make. And this huge debt, like you said, like a mortgage, this huge debt that you're going to have to pay back and live with. You can't get rid of it. You can't file bankruptcy. It's there to stay. No. Right? So people have to really think about it. So if you are heading to college this September or even the following year, please think about these student loans and take them out sparingly. And if you're a parent watching this, talk to your children. How about a local college? How about a state school? Because at the end of the day, right, this is going to eat into our wealth, whatever little wealth we do have, and for years and years and years. So, so that's it. So these are maybe some of the things that we can avoid. Just make a calculated decision, return on investment.
There's another strategy is, I have a friend of mine, for example, he's sending his son to a community college for the first 2 years. Mm-hmm. They already know where he'll be going and he can transfer those credits. So he'll have a degree from a different school, but at almost 50% off, because the first couple of years he's going to go to a much less expensive school.
Yeah, exactly.
There's ways to make it work.
We just got to make it work. I mean, the Black wealth gap, which is a completely different subject, which you and I will talk about some other time, it's real and it's ugly. So we just have to really pay attention to our personal economics. So, Quentin, I really like to thank you today for joining me. Again, you were my first guest, and I'd love to have you on some other time to talk about other subjects. And for everyone else, thank you for listening in. Thank you for joining my channel. And if you love what you hear, please subscribe. Every single week, I will be addressing real estate related matters. And so this is a great place, a great resource to get real information, no fluff stuff, real information from Janet Nation. So with that, I hope to see you again soon. Bye.